All right, so we'll get started. I imagine we'll have some other people drift in as we go. Thanks for making the time to join us today. I'm hoping that today you're going to go away with a bit more of an understanding about ISO 27001 as a standard and what it's for. A little bit of an idea about how to think about applying that standard in your own organization, and in particular how to think about using think about your AWS platform as a part of your infrastructure that contains information that you need to secure, and how you think about including your AWS estate in how you think about risk when you're going for your ISO 27001 certificates. We'll have a Q&A after the session, so do save your questions until then in terms of kind of speaking out. But if you want to type questions into the chat as we go, I've got a couple of colleagues on the call today who will be able to answer them, hopefully. But if you do stick a question in the chat, I might come to the end and we'll answer that on the video as well, so that people who are watching the recording can benefit from that answer. Who am I? Why am I someone who can be talking about this? Well, I'm the founder and CEO of the Scale Factory. My name's John, and I founded the business in 2009. So we've been doing this for quite a long time, but I was doing infrastructure and operation stuff before that, almost over 20 years at this point, which is a frightening thing to think about. As well as running the Scale Factory, I host the AWS user group in London. That's something that we do sort of 6 events a year in person with speakers, so forth. If you're in London, do consider checking that out. And I'm also an AWS ambassador, which is we're a group of people who work for AWS partners who are out in the community creating content, organizing events, and that sort of thing. So this is my kind of area of expertise, I suppose, and the area of expertise of the Scale Factory as a whole. We're going to, as we go today, I'm going to pop up some polls just to ask some questions of you to get a sense of who you are, where you are on your journey, and so forth. So the first poll is coming up in a second. Just need to press some buttons here. You should be able to see a poll there. I'm going to put 60 seconds on the clock just for you to stick your answers in there. This is the extent of the interactivity of this session is polling, but we do find it's a good way of making sure that we're tailoring the content to the needs of the audience. So do take the time to click the buttons if you can. We're asking right now, why are you interested in ISO 27001? Do you want to improve your information security position? Are you finding that not being certified is blocking sales opportunities? Maybe you're contractually obliged to. Maybe you've sold something to a customer who's now expecting you to be compliant within a certain time frame. Maybe an advisor that you work with has recommended that you become certified, or something else. And if you're answering other, do feel free to drop that in the chat if we've missed a reason. And a question of, are you currently using AWS? Most of you seem to have said yes so far, which is a good sign. You are in the right place, because that's the cloud platform that we're talking about for the most part today. Okay, that's the 60 seconds up. I'm going to hit end poll, and I'm going to share the results so that you can all see those. Similar to actually when we last ran this webinar, most people are interested in ISO 27001 in order to improve their information security position. And I think that's a really good reason. I think a lot of people look at compliance regimes as a box ticking exercise to get to the sales that they want to get to, but actually using this as a way to improve your information security is a good thing as well. Who doesn't want to be secure would be a question I'll ask anybody. And pretty much everybody is using AWS, so good. This is the relevant question today. It's Mike. Hello, Mike. Saying working in the regulated space, there's external pressure to have certification from that community. So yeah, I guess it's related to sales opportunities, but actually the industry as a whole is sort of recommending it as an approach. So good. We now know a little bit more about you and what's important to you. So we can move on and start looking at the rest of the content. So what is ISO IEC 27001? So you may have come across this as a thing. Like, I guess if you joined the webinar today, ISO 27001 is on your mind already. But if you're not aware of what it is an internationally recognized standard, and it establishes requirements for something we call an information security management system. An information security management system is a mechanism by which you can list and track risks, score them, treat them, and demonstrates to an auditor or your customers that you're thinking sensibly about information security risk. It's a non-prescriptive framework. So unlike something like PCI DSS, if you're familiar with that, PCI DSS tells you what you need to do. ISO 27001 provides a framework in which you can think about how risk affects your business and how to think about information security as a way, in a way that sort of suits the needs of your specific business. And that's a bit of a double-edged sword, in that it gives you sort of wiggle room to adopt the standard in a way that suits you. But it does mean it can be ambiguous and a little open to interpretation. So when it comes to audit time, you do need to make sure that your auditors think the same way about the standard as it applies to your business as you do. So that can be challenging. And it also means that when you're searching for information about this online, which I'm sure you will be doing, you'll be asking ChatGPT to write your policies for you and that sort of thing. You've got to be slightly careful because something that applies to one business, such as the business that the author is in, doesn't necessarily apply to your business because you have different constraints. You might be dealing with different types of data in different systems. So do be slightly cautious about the stuff you find on the internet about this stuff. But that's in a nutshell what we're talking about. It's a non-prescriptive, risk-based approach to think about information security in your organization and track that in a meaningful and auditable way. So why do we need a standard like this? Well, your customers need to be able to trust you as a supplier. If you're here, you're probably working with a SaaS business or some other online service-based organization, and you'll be selling your product to enterprise buyers or business customers typically. And those customers need a way to trust that you're going to keep their data safe for them. It doesn't really matter, generally speaking, what sort of data you're dealing with for those customers. They are all going to have the same kind of view that their data is really important, should be kept really safe. So in order to trust that you are a safe pair of hands for keeping their data, your customers are going to be running a due diligence process of some kind to reduce their exposure to supply chain risk, as you as a supplier form part of their supply chain. And if you're watching the news over the last sort of 12 months in the sort of IT space, you'll have heard of things like the SolarWinds hack, where a foreign intelligence agency gained access to multiple government departments because of a supply chain issue. There were issues earlier in the year with LastPass and with CircleCI. These are organizations that probably have access to fairly sensitive data on behalf of their customers. Your customers want to make sure that you're not one of those organizations. You're not going to leak their secrets out into the world or do something untrustworthy with their data. So the question then is, what tools exist for a customer to evaluate suppliers and their security? Well, it's a bit of a blunt instrument, but most organizations today work with supplier questionnaires. Now, it's entirely possible that over the next decade, we'll see improvements to how this sort of procurement works. But today, supplier questionnaires are pretty much the norm. And they're pretty extensive. They can contain hundreds of questions, and they are not very nuanced. The customer that you're selling to is giving you the same questionnaire as they give every other supplier they have. It doesn't matter what type of data you hold, whether it's sensitive or not, you're going to get the same set of questions. And you'll find that a lot of these, the questions in these questionnaires have a lot of overlap with the types of things that standards like ISO 27001 care about. They're typically pretty in-depth. They can be pretty technical, and as a result, they will probably require the attention of the CTO or the CISO in your organization to complete. Maybe you're one of the people in your organization that has to complete these yourself. And as a result of that, the CTO or the CISO is going to spend a lot of their time, certainly in the sort of growth phase of a SaaS business, talking to enterprise customers and filling out these questionnaires on their behalf. So I'm going to ask you another poll now to see what your exposure to these types of supplier questionnaires are. And I'm going to press that button to pop that up. Kind of interested to hear, what sort of size of questionnaires have you dealt with historically? And how many questionnaires are you getting during the course of your sales as you stand today? I'm going to give you, I put 60 seconds on the clock, so you've got about 45 seconds left to answer that question. Interested in getting a sense of the size and challenge that you see when it comes to these type of compliance or security questionnaires. So far, nobody said that they have answered a more than 1,000 question questionnaire. That's reassuring. I think last time we did this webinar, there was one in the sort of fintech world. We tend to find that the more regulated the customer, the more in-depth the questionnaire they're providing, because the more complex their security environment is. Another few seconds left to complete that. Okay, time's up. Let's have a look at the results of that poll. So we can see that most people are dealing with questionnaires of 100 or more questions. In some cases, over 250 or over 500. So that's pretty normal. I think that's what we see in the market today. Most of you are dealing with 1 to 10 questionnaires in the last year, or maybe 3 out of 9 of you are dealing with 11 to 50 questionnaires. So I think you can probably we can probably see then that this is taking up your time, right? There's a lot of this on the go, and hopefully you'll see that as we talk about this compliance challenge, getting something like ISO 27001 will make that questionnaire answering process a little easier for you, and hopefully get your sales pipeline moving a little quicker. Stop the sharing of the poll now. So our experience has shown that with a compliance certification under their belt, ISO 27001, particularly in Europe, but other compliance regimes in the world as well, typically these questionnaires are easier to answer because you've already thought about a lot of the questions on there. So as an earlier stage business, you might still be feeling your way around the security problem. There's quite a lot of challenge in building a secure infrastructure. But as you tackle your certification process, you'll find it's easier to answer those questionnaires as they come in. Or in some cases, you can avoid answering those questions altogether. Sometimes it's sufficient to provide your access to your information security management system, your list of risks, and how you've treated those, and that's sufficient for the buyer to see that you're doing a good job. That, as a result, typically means that the sales cycle is going to be shorter, which is great news for your sales and revenue people. And typically it'll mean you can close bigger deals. These types of questionnaires are much more common in much bigger organizations. Enterprise buyers of SaaS are really appealing to SaaS builders because they spend more money and they churn less. So your sales team will almost certainly be looking to sell to these types of organizations. And being able to close bigger deals is good for them, good for you. And as many of you said, you're interested in increasing the level of security in your organization anyway, not just getting compliant. And so by getting compliant, you're going to be addressing some of these operational risks just as a sort of a side effect or a kind of the point of the thing. Once you've got a really good information security management system, you can also find that you can delegate some of this questionnaire paperwork to other people in your team. A lot of the stuff is going to be written down that your customers are going to be asking. You can copy and paste stuff out of your ISMS into those questionnaires, and once that's possible, that can be done by your sales team or by someone who's supporting the sales team. Doesn't need the attention of an executive, which is important. And some of the customers we've spoken to say that the sales cycle, once they got compliant, has been shortened by as much as a month, and that's pretty impressive stuff. So ISO 27001 is made up of 2 parts. The first part is the ISO 27001 standard itself. It's mandatory, it's non-negotiable, and it sets out the requirements for your information security management system. And then there's also ISO 27002, which is also known as Annex A, which defines a number of security controls that you might want to choose to use in your business. Now, some people in the ISO community will probably tell you that you have to adopt all of the Annex A controls. That's not true. It's really down to you to adopt the ones that are applicable for your business. So you should definitely consider them. We at the Scale Factory are ISO 27001 certified. Our list of controls doesn't include all of Annex A. For example, we don't have an office, and so we don't have any controls relating to physical security, because that's not a concern that we have from an office perspective. And in the 2022 version of ISO 27002, that's what we're talking about today, there are 93 controls. So that's a not inconsiderable number to think about. And so you're probably thinking, where do I start with all this, right? It's quite complex. There's a lot to it. When we first embarked on our ISO 27001 journey, we were pretty overfaced by it as well. So at a very, very high level, your ISO 27001 compliance journey will include establishing your information security management system. You're going to look at the risks that exist in your organization as far as they apply to information security. You're going to choose the controls from Annex A that are applicable to your organization. You might also add some other controls from other sources that make sense as well. If you're on AWS, you're going to be establishing an AWS account strategy, and we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail in the coming slides. And then you're going to treat some of the risks. Now, you don't have to treat all of the risks that you have in order to get certified, but you may choose to treat some risks ahead of that certification process. We tackled a good handful of risks before going down the audit process, because we wanted to improve our position. And as a sort of ongoing consideration, year by year, you will assess new risks, you'll treat them, and you'll move on from there. You're also going to collect evidence, so you need to be able to demonstrate to an auditor that you have treated the risks or documented them. So that's evidence collection is a key part of this as well. And then you'll schedule your audit. And so someone from the outside will come and take a look at your ISMS, sit down with your executives and ask a bunch of questions. And I think an audit's typically sort of 2 or 3 days of that sort of thing. And at the end of that audit, you'll find out whether or not you've been certified. There's a white paper that we've written that covers this journey in a little bit more detail. I'll make sure that we link to that in the follow-up from this session. So one tip that we've found along the way and that we've seen work really well for some of our SaaS customers is to choose an automated compliance platform. ISMSs can be kind of complicated, and establishing one yourself can be a complicated task. A lot of organizations historically will have done this in spreadsheets, big hairy Excel documents of the type that you've probably seen before. But if you consider using an automated compliance platform to help you establish this ISMS, it will make your life a lot easier. We partner with an organization called Vanta, largely because that was the name that kept coming up when we were talking to customers about information security management systems and ISO 27001. And Vanta is a really good solution which provides, amongst other things, policy templates. So a lot of ISO 27001 involves writing policies. For example, end user advice policies, information security policies for your staff to follow. And Vanta comes with a number of templates that you can use and adapt to your own needs. It also provides you with an automated way of managing your risk register in a way that integrates also with your ticketing system. So if you're using something like Jira or Trello, as you identify risks and flag the need to treat those risks, there'll be tasks that come out of that assessment, and those tasks go into your ticketing system so that you can track those in the way you track your other projects. And I guess important thing, or one of the important things for those of you joining today is that you can integrate Vanta with AWS, and it can automatically collect evidence from your AWS estate, particularly around things like vulnerability management, automated asset discovery, and that sort of thing, and report on your compliance position into Vanta, which means that you can look at a dashboard and see whether your AWS estate is compliant, and an auditor can come and look at that and see green everywhere and be happy that you are following the rules that you've set for yourself. So do consider Vanta. If you are interested in exploring Vanta, please let us know. We can introduce you to someone from the Vanta team for a demo. It is good stuff. We actually discovered Vanta after we started our ISO journey. So our ISMS is currently a stack of spreadsheets, and we do wish that we had gone with Vanta. So don't make the mistake that we did. Do consider one of these automated tools. The risk reduction cycle is a sort of key part of the ISO 27001 process, and I would argue that if this is if getting secure is the thing that you are interested in as a sort of outcome, this is the thing that's going to give you the most value. You can think of this as a sort of variation of the plan, do, check, act method of iterative design, slightly less vague. You start at the top there by assessing your risks, and that's a sort of that's a sit down and write down lots of horrifying information security scenarios activity. So you might, for example, have risks around your customers' data being on your employees' laptops. That's a risk. If that laptop gets stolen, then that data could be accessible to people who shouldn't have it. So that's one scenario that you need to be scared of. And risk assessment is a sort of process of churning out as many of these as you can think of, really. And once you've assessed those risks and listed them and added them to your ISMS, then you need to decide a treatment. A treatment is you can either accept that risk. You can say, you know what, that risk is it's a low risk with low or slight impact. We don't need to worry too much about treating that. We'll just accept it. We write it down. We acknowledge that it's there, but we don't need to spend any time or money on solving it. You might modify the risk, so you might take action to make that risk a little less impactful. So in the customer data on your company laptops approach, you might put in a control to prevent your staff from having customer data on their laptops. You might require them to encrypt their laptops, to require biometric security on those laptops so that data can't be gotten at. You might share that risk, in which you're kind of giving that to another party to have some kind of responsibility for, or you could avoid that risk entirely. I would say that risks around customer data being on employee laptops, if you in fact say we're not going to allow customer data on employee laptops, and that risk goes away, it's been avoided. So you decide on your treatment. You'll choose controls from Annex A or other lists of controls. So Annex A covers a lot of control options for treating information security risks. So you might choose one from there and then implement that in order to reduce the risk, and then evaluate the results of having done so. And then you go around the cycle again. You go and look at new risks you might have introduced by accident by mitigating that first one. And on an ongoing basis, you'll probably meet as a sort of security working group. Periodically, we do this every fortnight to talk about new risks that we've seen as we've been working, that either we didn't notice before or that have come up as a result of changes to how we work. And we go round and round and continuously reduce our risk. Continuous improvement is really the one of the important and valuable parts of this process, I would say. In the AWS landscape, there's a thing, you might have seen this slide before. It's certainly in a good deal of my webinar slide decks, the shared responsibility model. And in this model, we're saying that there are certain things that AWS are responsible for from a security perspective. And there are certain things that you, building on AWS, are responsible for. It is not sufficient to build on AWS and assume that you are now secure as a result. You have to make good architectural and operational choices so that your solution is secure, even though AWS do take care of a lot of these things for you. So AWS will take care of physical security of the data centers, things like networking equipment, the hypervisor, the Nitro platform, if you're familiar with Nitro within AWS. They are doing all of that on your behalf. That's part of the money that you pay for your services from AWS. It involves them taking care of those aspects of security. You as a customer need to worry about the security security in the cloud. And that's the configuration of your VPCs, your networks, your firewalls, how you encrypt data, what access controls you put in place, patching of EC2 instances if you're running servers. And by using AWS, you as an ISO 27001 combatant, should we use that word? You get to avoid Section 7 of the Annex A controls, because they're all about physical security, physical entry, cabling security. So a good example of how adopting a cloud platform does take care of some of the security stuff that you might otherwise need to worry about. But you still need to think about this stuff yourself as well. There are a couple of different options for how you engage AWS services. In the past, you might just have run up EC2 instances, which look like servers to all intents and purposes. And in that world, you as the person who's spun up that server are responsible for operating system patching and the security of those operating systems. That's very much in a infrastructure as a service model. There are a number of newer approaches that AWS provides that you'd think of more as platform as a security, platform as a service. I'm thinking here about ECS Fargate. I'm thinking about Lambda and other sort of managed services. If you adopt something like Fargate or Lambda, then some of the security stuff around patching operating systems, for example, is now also AWS's problem. So there's a great argument for going up the stack and adopting more managed services in a sort of modernization approach, because in doing that, you reduce the surface area of security issues that you need to solve for yourself. It also makes a number of other operational concerns easier. So do consider, if you're currently running actual servers, EC2 instances, there may be a more secure way of solving that problem. We, for example, work with a customer who does card payments. And part of the way that we've satisfied the requirements of the standards that the card payment industry requires is by using Lambda. So there are no servers. So a lot of the sort of requirements around patching servers just sort of go away because they're taken care of by using Lambda. So let's have a think about the approach to implementing an Annex A control on AWS. Annex A, as I said before, is a list of controls that you can choose from optionally. They're not prescriptive because they don't tell you exactly what to do on AWS, for example, but they do list a number of, I guess, classes of approaches. And we'll go through that now with one particular example and have a look at how you might apply that in your AWS landscape. And we're going to look in particular today at 8.15, which is a control around logging. And the standard says that the control is to record events, generate evidence, ensure the integrity of log information, prevent against unauthorized access, identify information security events that can lead to an information security incident, and to support investigation. So that's quite a mouthful. And you probably know what logging is as a sort of standard approach. But let's think about logging from the perspective of ISO 27001, and in particular, this Annex A control. So first of all, one thing that you find useful is to think about control dependencies. Many controls in Annex A kind of depend on each other. So whilst 8.15 thinks about logging as an outcome, there are also controls that relate to other aspects that you're going to need to think about. So, for example, 528 collection of evidence. 8.11, which is data masking, which is making sure that you don't have sensitive data in your logs. You've got 8.25, which is use of cryptography. So if you're building a compliant logging framework, not only do you have to follow the requirements from 8.15 around logging, but you're also going to depend on all these other requirements to make sure that you're logging safely and securely. So quite a lot to think about. So let's have a look at these guidelines from a perspective of how you implement them within AWS. So logging there are a number of different options. We're going to think today about the logs that you get from your AWS platform. So you might be feeding logs into this from your applications, but I'm thinking particularly around the logs that get generated when you interact with AWS as a thing. And if you're familiar with AWS and you've done stuff around logging before, you will have heard of AWS CloudTrail. That's your kind of standard AWS logging solution. And in this diagram, the enclosing box there is an account, and we've called that a workload account. So we can assume that you've got an account with your application running in it, and alongside your application, you've set up AWS CloudTrail, and CloudTrail is capturing log events from the platform, maybe also from your application if you've set it up appropriately, so that we can see what's going on. It ticks the general logging box. The CloudTrail has structured logs. And so that's kind of one of the requirements. But in the sort of default setup of an AWS account with CloudTrail in it, anybody who has administrative privileges on this account can disable CloudTrail, which isn't desirable, because if you can turn off the logging, then you can do things with the logs off that then there's no evidence of. So you want to avoid that, really. Any administrative user can delete the trail, so that data can be removed. You can cover your tracks if you're an attacker, not great. And any administrative user can read the logs, which is a violation of least privilege. Really, not everybody on that platform needs to be able to read those logs. And the data in CloudTrail isn't retained beyond the default 90 days. So after those 3 months are up, that data's disappeared. And there's very little in the way of analytics capability. You can't really dig into those logs in detail with CloudTrail and sort of figure out what's going on. So as far as the Annex A control is concerned, we've really only ticked 2 of those boxes. We've ticked the log structure and types of events to log box, and we've ticked protected from failure of storage media, because AWS are making sure that those logs are durable. But we haven't ticked any of the rest of them. So that's not really good enough to meet the needs of that control. So here we introduce a new approach where rather than just having a single workload account, we also now introduce a management account. This is a multi-account architecture that we're growing here. And in a multi-account architecture, we might set up something like AWS organizations, which is how you can manage multiple accounts from a central location. Those accounts both have CloudTrail in them, so the management account and also the workload account have CloudTrail, because we want logs in both. But the key thing that we've added here, which is of interest, is a service control policy. And a service control policy is it's an access control configuration, and it looks quite a lot like an IAM policy. So if you're familiar with AWS IAM, service control policies look a lot like that, but they apply to the whole account. And that also means that they apply to the root user of an account you've applied it to. So in the multi-account architecture here, we've applied that service control policy across the whole organization, which means that the controls within that service control policy apply now to the workload account. And the controls that we might apply here, as you can see, looks like an IAM policy. We are adding an explicit deny for CloudTrail actions, stop logging and delete trail. And that means that even if you're the root user in the workload account, you cannot stop CloudTrail from logging and you cannot delete the trail. So you can see we've now improved our position, because we've protected CloudTrail from deactivation, even by privileged users, and we've protected it against deletion and modification, and we still have obviously log structure and protected from failure of storage media from our first pass, because that's the default that CloudTrail adds. But there are still some boxes to tick. So let's have a think about how we might advance that solution in order to tick some more boxes. We've extended the multi-account architecture here to include some more services. We've still got the management account across the top, and we're still using service control policies to protect some of this logging. We've added another service control policy here, which we'll talk about in a second. We now also have separate production and development accounts. This is fairly common. We see SaaS businesses do this a lot. Actually, in some cases, we'll see SaaS businesses set up an account per customer. So it's quite a lot of accounts might be managed in this way. But the CloudTrail logging in all of these accounts, management, production, development, and the log archive account, which is new, they're all flowing into an Amazon S3 bucket. So this log archive account now is a dedicated account for storing logs. The S3 bucket is set up with some lifecycle rules, so that logs over a certain age are going to get moved into Amazon Glacier, where they can live inexpensively for a very long time. Some compliance regimes require you to be storing logs for 7 years, for example. You can do that with Glacier fairly easily and relatively cost effectively. We also have here CloudWatch checksumming. So as a log file is created, a checksum is generated for it. It's called file integrity validation. And so you can tell whether or not the file has been tampered with. If it doesn't match the checksum, then it's been messed with. So we now have this extra control that allows us to be confident that the contents of that file haven't been changed. If for some reason someone had been able to work around those service control policies and modify it. We also have here Amazon Athena. If you're not familiar with Athena, it's a service that allows you to query structured data that lives in S3 in a SQL-like manner. So you can use SQL language, if you're familiar with that, to interrogate those log files and pull out aggregated details about it. So nice and easy, fairly inexpensively. No infrastructure to run alongside that. You just throw a query in and you're charged on a per query basis, or a per terabyte queried basis, I think it is. But you might also choose to do something with AWS OpenSearch, which is a Elasticsearch compatible service. So if you know the Elk stack, for example, you'll be familiar with things like Grafana, Kibana for examining this sort of data. That takes a bit more infrastructure to stand up, so you probably won't be doing that unless you really are in those logs, examining them all the time. But that is an option as well. And we can also use CloudWatch to search for or watch for patterns appearing in the log. So you might create a CloudWatch rule that's looking for someone escalating privileges or accessing things that they shouldn't be allowed to access, and you can tie that to an alert so that somebody in your operations team or your security team gets told when that's happening. And the service control policies here are still protecting the CloudTrail to prevent people from turning it off or deleting those rules. And there's a service control policy that protects the log archive account as a whole. And you probably also limit who in your team is able to access the log archive account and what they can do on there. There's no point, if you've got your organization set up so that your finance team can look at your AWS bills, they probably don't need access to the log archive account. It's a least privilege consideration. So if we look now at the Annex A control, we can see that with that multi-account setup, we've ticked all those boxes. We've got structured events that we're logging. Those logs are not allowed to be deactivated because we prevented that with service control policies. Protected from deletion and modification again, and we've also used the checksumming to make sure that we can prove that things haven't been tampered with. We're protected from failure of the storage media because S3 is extremely durable. We can store data in line with our data retention policy because we can use Glacier to cold store logs that are no longer active for long periods of time inexpensively. And we're protecting sensitive data because we're access controlling the log archive account and limiting who can get in there. We're also providing log analytics and anomalous behavior detection by making it possible to query those logs with Athena, with something OpenSearch related, and use CloudWatch to look for anomalies. So we can tick all that boxes, and so we have met the needs of that control. And the further you get, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot here, and to be fair, there is. But the further you go with it, the easier it is, because once you're using service control policies, you'll just be extending those to cover other protections that you need to add. Once you understand and are thinking about encryption appropriately on AWS, the things that you're doing there kind of apply to most of the services as well. And a lot of policies overlap. So you've seen that we had a lot of dependencies to go through for this logging control. We've tackled those dependencies, and now we've probably tackled those dependencies across the entirety of your AWS estate as well. So it does over time get easier to apply. But the key thing to take away, or one key thing to take away today, I think, is that an AWS multi-account strategy is a really good idea. AWS accounts themselves don't cost any money until you're running things within them. It's free to create an account. So, and accounts are the most solid security boundary that exists within the platform. And so, using accounts for for segregating workloads and log archive stuff and your security controls it's a good thing to do. Segregation really cuts across a lot of the controls as a theme, so in the world that we work in with SaaS businesses, we're often creating these types of multi-account setups to tackle this sort of ISO challenge, and we're creating separate accounts for backups, for log aggregation, for security, for CI and CD, and so forth. So accounts are free, so you might as well use them to give yourself a strong isolation boundary. But if you are running multiple accounts, if you're relatively new to AWS, or you're maybe managing 2 or 3 accounts and thinking that that's quite enough, thank you very much. There is another service that you probably want to be looking at, which a lot of our customers are using today, which is called AWS Control Tower. And Control Tower allows you to set up and govern one of these multi-account environments. It also integrates with your identity provider, so that your users in your user directory can access multiple accounts fairly easily. There's a number of things that Control Tower sets up around security, sort of from day one out of the box. Many of those are proactive checks to look at what's been set up and identify and complain about insecure settings. So, for example, if you create an S3 bucket that's publicly readable, there are controls within the Control Tower deployment that by default will complain about that. And there's a suite of service control policies and other things. All that separate log archive account setup, Control Tower takes care of that out of the box, and you can apply your own security standards to the settings of Control Tower to spread those around your accounts. You can set up configuration with Control Tower to alert into Slack when it sees anomalous activity, using things like guard duty or to look for things that are weird. My favorite example of that is we worked with a financial services provider who are based in London, and the CTO flew to Asia to go and have a conversation with a customer. And he logged into his AWS account, and guard duty lit up like a Christmas tree because that was weird. Simon logging in wasn't strange, but Simon logging in from Asia was pretty unusual, and that flagged it for someone to have a look at as a concern. You can also use Amazon Inspector for vulnerability management. That's all sort of hooked up with Control Tower as well. The Control Tower setup provides an account factory. So as you need new accounts for customers or for new developers, you can vend a new account out of Control Tower with a security baseline applied to it before it's usable, so that a lot of those security controls are in place by the time anybody can log in and set things up in that account. So if you're not familiar with Control Tower, and you are thinking about using a multi-account solution of some sort, it's really worth your time, and it's helped a lot of our customers. So your next steps from here, we've got a couple of free assessments that we can offer you. We have an AWS readiness assessment. So if you are currently using AWS, but you haven't gone near sort of risk assessments or anything like that as yet, we can have a look at your account and help you understand what risks you do have, and what it would take to close those risks ahead of an audit. If you're already partway through the process of your ISO 27001 security, so your certification, then you might benefit from us having a look over your risks and making sure that you know how to treat them all, and provide some guidance on treating them if you haven't got as far as that yet. So if you haven't yet started your compliance journey, the readiness assessment is the right idea. And if you started already, a risk assessment might help as well. We will share some links to these in the chat, and we'll follow up by email with those as well, in case that's of any interest. So finally, we'll throw up a final poll. Interested to know whereabouts you are in your ISO journey today. Love to know whether you learned something new today. That's always a good bit of feedback for me. And if you'll be booking an assessment with us in future, if one of those assessments I just mentioned seemed like a good idea for you, just to get a sense of whether that's an interesting offer. Another 30 seconds or so on that poll. 5 of you still to vote. Nearly there. That's it. So we'll share the results. So most of you are just getting started. So hopefully this has been useful to you. It looks like most of you learned something today, so that's positive. Some of you halfway through, some of you nearly there. So lots of different stages of the journey. And a couple of you saying that you're going to be booking an assessment with us. That's really good to hear. So thanks for participating in the polls. I know it's a bit more interactive than maybe some of the webinars that you're used to. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll go to Q&A if anybody has any questions. See, there were some that popped up in the chat as we went along. Let's have a look. So not a question, but Mark Pickerton says Vanta has an AI questionnaire completion. We haven't tried it in anger yet. Yes, they're continually innovating the product. There are other things in the market that do purport to be able to look at the answers you've given to previous security questionnaires and give those answers to new questionnaires. So there's a service called HyperComply that does a similar kind of thing. I don't know much about whether they are big time savers. I think that the people we know who are using HyperComply are positive about it, but I think sort of depends on the format you get your questionnaire in, really. Compare Vanta to Drata. Yeah, they're sort of similar. They're in the same kind of space. I think if Vanta is the name that we hear most frequently when we are working with customers, Drata is probably the second most frequent. But we haven't worked with Drata ourselves, so we don't really have a comparison to make there. Mike says Vanta seems to have more support for frameworks that apply to locations in Europe, but both are US companies today. If you are doing, if you're planning to sell as a UK or European based company into US customers, you might at some point also need to do SOC 2, which is, again, it's a sort of risk-based framework. SOC 2 is kind of what your US buyers tend to be asking for. ISO 27001 tends to be what European buyers are asking for. You can do both. Some people would say it's easier to start with SOC 2 and then go to ISO 27001 later. Sort of depends what your customers are asking for. You should probably prioritize whatever the thing that your customers are asking for, really. But you can do both, and if you choose your controls well, the same set of controls can apply to both standards, and so you get a sort of a double whammy, if you like. If you're using something like Vanta, Vanta will support ISO and SOC 2, and so if you've got your ISO 27001 sorted, Vanta will be able to report on how far you are away from SOC 2 in terms of what you're currently doing. So another argument in favor of the automation tools, I think. So Mike Moat, does anyone have any good sources of info pointers on retrofitting Control Tower to an existing multi-account setup created with Terraform, and how Control Tower can coexist with Terraform or not? Now, on the call today, my colleague Mike Mead, who's definitely had this conversation with a number of people, so I'm going to let him open his mic up and answer that for you.
Yeah, it's probably the question that we get asked the most. I've actually got a really good blog post that a colleague of mine wrote that I'll share in a moment. But essentially, the way that we typically look at it is looking at account baseline stuff as living within the Control Tower ecosystem. So when you create an account or you have an account managed in it, have that look after account management. So consolidated billing, maybe single sign-on, all of the built-in AWS services that you want to turn on. and move those out of Terraform. And the reason for that is Control Tower has a very robust compliance story and will give you a dashboard with green ticks that you don't get with, say, a Terraform module. So if you have Control Tower turn on CloudTrail for audit login, it's much more robust from a sort of security and compliance story than it is having that in Terraform. So having all your account stuff, move that into the Control Tower ecosystem, and then have it set up your Terraform hooks. So whatever that might be. So let's say you use Terraform Cloud or another tool, or you run it locally, having Control Tower, when it creates that account, put enough in place so that you can run Terraform out of the box, and then basically do everything with Terraform. And it works really well. Like I think 70% of our Control Tower deployments are working with Terraform, and that's a really good pattern. I'll share this blog post because it has a bit more of a sort of breakdown of what things to put where, and also when you're extending Control Tower, what tooling you can use. It's changed a little bit in the last few years, and there's currently one tool that we recommend for sort of linking APIs together between, like, if you are using, say, Terraform Cloud and stuff like that. Let me just share this with you. There we go. Is Control Tower suitable for Terraform users?
Yes, it is. That's the,
yes.
Yes. So there we go.
Yeah.
There's a whole blog post on it. Cool. Thanks, Mike. Well, thanks, Mike, for the question, and other Mike for the answer. We'll take other questions if you have them. Do feel free to light your microphone up and ask, or type it in the chat. We'll give you 30 seconds or so to see if there are any more of those.
I think somebody had some issue viewing slides, but we are going to share a video of this afterwards, aren't we?
Yes.
We'll share attendees.
We'll share a video recording. We'll also share the slide deck, so you'll be able to see both of those. And there are some other resources that we'll follow up with in the next day or so. There's a white paper that covers a little bit more about those sort of 7 steps to compliance, and there'll be some of the links that we've shared in the chat today. We'll stick those in the email as well. If you're joining today as someone who's joined from LinkedIn, so we had 2 places where we listed this webinar. There was the meetup group and on LinkedIn. If you're joining from LinkedIn, the meetup group is a group called the SaaS CTO Network. It's a group of around 350 so far CTOs and technical decision makers from SaaS businesses. We run webinars like this. We also host roundtable discussions and in-person gatherings occasionally as well. And so if you're interested in that, there'll be some details about that in the email I send you as well. But you can also, in theory, I think you just Google the SaaS CTO Network and it'll be the top meetup group in that list. Although I actually haven't tried that recently, so that might not be correct. Cool. Well, thanks for joining, folks. I'm going to hit the stop button on the recording. Anybody who wants to hang around, turn their camera and mic on and just sort of chat amongst yourselves for the next sort of 15-20 minutes, do feel free to do that. But if you're dropping off now, thanks for your attention, and we'll be in touch with some follow-up. Great to present to you. Thanks very much.